Electronisounds Audio, the YouTube channel for you.
Hey, what's happening, friends? It's Dean from Electronisounds. Stick around. This is going to be a fun one today. Today, we're going to be exploring using the Caixa Eurorack case as an effects case. I've already explored using this awesome Eurorack case as a drum machine. I'm going to put a link to that video up in the corner if you want to check that out. And today, we're going to be checking out lots of different effects setups in the Caixa case. I'm going to be running all sorts of gear through it. We're going to be swapping out modules, and it's guaranteed to have a lot of talkie bits. Come on, let's have some fun. This is the first setup that I've put together using the Caixa case as an effects rack, and I think it sounds really fantastic. Let me explain this setup. We're starting out with an iPad, and this is Beatmaker 3, which is my favorite music making app on an iPad. This is one of my favorite sounds to play live on an iPad in my live jams. And we're routing the iPad into an audio interface. This is the Novation Audio Hub 2x4, but the brand of interface isn't really relevant here. What's relevant is that we're routing the audio output of that interface directly into the Caixa case. From there, I'm routing that audio into a mixer that has an effects send. This is the Stereo Sir Mix-a-Lot module, and using the effects send allows me to dial in just the right amount of these effects that I want to on the sounds. This is a really simple setup, and I'm only using a black stereo delay from Erica Synths and the Desmodas Versio reverb from Noise Engineering. Now, the Desmodas Versio is a really thick and textured and special reverb. I actually have a video on that specifically. I'll put a link to that video up in the corner if you want to check it out. It's a really awesome reverb. Okay, but what we're doing here to finish the routing is I'm taking that the iPad signal through the case and then out of the case, and we're routing that directly into the Electron Digitact so that I can mix that with the output coming out of the Digitact. I've put together a little beat in the Digitact, and we're going to play the sound with that beat, combining all of the audio out of the main output of the Digitact. I'm going to play you the sound dry, and then I will add the effects that I'm using the Caixa case for. Check out what this sounds like. We're going to try something a little bit different today, and we're going to start with the wrap-up and my final thoughts first. This is actually day 5 of working on this project, and I've had quite a bit of experience now using the Caixa case as an effects rack. The reason that I wanted to give this a go is because, you know, with all of my Eurorack experience so far, I haven't ever actually set up a case to be used exclusively as an effects rack, where I'm only loading effects modules into it. And for the most part, in this video and in these experiments, I'm only running non-Eurorack gear into the Caixa case being used this way. At the end of the day, I've actually found it to be a really limiting way to use Eurorack, and I kept finding myself really wanting to add other modules to the case and get like extra sound sources and extra modulation type of effects, and effects that I could sync up with the MIDI of these hardware boxes to trigger envelopes and really get extra creative and just kind of use the tools that Eurorack really excels at. Now, the Caixa case makes a great effects rack because it does have the default built-in inputs and outputs, so I was able to route lots of different hardware signals through the case without any difficulty. I just found at the end of the day to use Eurorack as an effects system only felt really limiting to me personally, and I probably wouldn't set up another case to be used specifically as an effects rack in the future. Let's talk a little bit about this setup, and let me explain some of the routing as well. Now, this setup is based around the MAM MB33 analog retro bass synthesizer, which is basically a Roland TB303 clone for getting like acid lead sounds. And these really like to be run through a distortion to add a little bit of extra grit and overdrive. And that made me realize that I don't actually have a dedicated distortion module in my Eurorack collection. But what I do have is the Instro Tone module, so I've added that to the Caixa case for this setup. Now, the Instro Tone is like a wave shaper and an overdrive and a limiter, which is allowing us to sort of simulate that distortion sound. Now, what's really notable here, I think, is the routing, in that I've taken the direct output from the MAM, which is a mono synthesizer, and I've routed that into the left input of the Caixa case. I've taken that and I've run that into the buffered multiple so I can get a couple of different copies of that exact same clean signal. I'm running the first into the mixer here, which is going to a reverb and delay send. So I've got a clean version of the sound from the MAM going into channel 1 with just a little bit of reverb and delay from the Desmodus Versio reverb and the Erica Synths Black Stereo delay. But I'm also taking a duplicate of that sound and we're running that into the Instro Tone. I found though that when I really turn up the overdrive and really crank that signal up on the Instro, that it sort of muddies up the low end of the sound. So what I've done to remedy that is I've used the Expert Sleepers Disting MK3. I've pulled up the D1 algorithm, which is like a DJ filter, and we just push that a little bit to the right to get a little bit of a high pass filter effect so that I can remove a little bit of the low frequency content coming through on this sort of screaming distortion effect. That's getting routed back into a separate channel on the mixer, and I'm also routing reverb and delay through the sends of the mixer to that distorted channel as well. So we've got one clean channel and one distorted channel for a really thick and robust 303 emulation. Let's listen to what this sounds like. Oh, and just real quick, I forgot to mention that the Polyend play is actually sequencing the MAM over MIDI, and the beat is coming from the play via some samples. The output of the play is going directly into the 1010 Music Blue Box, which is also recording this session as well. So only the MAM is being routed through the case, and I'm taking the outputs of the case and I'm routing those into track 2 on the Blue Box. takes a lot of time and energy to make all these videos. In fact, today is day 4 of working on this particular video. If you've been enjoying my content, I'd like to encourage you to help support the channel by clicking that little like button under this video right here. It really helps support the channel. Thanks, friends. Most of you will already know that I really love that dub techno sound. So for this example, I've put together a really chilled and a really minimal type of techno groove. I'm using the Quasi-MIDI Revolution 309 and the Electribe EMX1. Now, I find that this genre typically, really benefits from a lot of really textured and dense sounding reverb and delay. So I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to use the individual outputs of the Revolution 309 and send one of these sounds into the case to process through that Erica Sense Black Stereo delay and that Noise Engineering Desmodes Versio. But I'm also this time taking a chord stab from the Korg Electribe EMX1 and I'm routing that into the case as well. So I'm routing a snare sound, like a percussion sound from the Revolution, and I'm also routing this chord stab from the EMX1. I'm utilizing that same technique that I used in the last example, where I'm using the multiple in the Caixa case to duplicate each of these sounds so that I can not only send them to multiple destinations throughout the case, but also do some interesting panning on these, channels as I multiple up the sounds, so I can go from just a really sterile mono sound to a sound that has a more interesting place in the stereo field per se. Now, I'm also running a duplicate of each of these sounds, so the snare percussion from the Revolution and the chord from the EMX here, through the intro tone, so I can utilize that sort of overdriven and sound and sort of brighten up each one of these sounds as well, to really add a little bit of, extra something to these sounds. Take a listen to what this sounds like. I just want to take a quick second and focus in on the amount of modulation that I'm sending in to the Desmodes Versio reverb, because I think these subtle CV modulations on the sound and texture and tone of that reverb really have a big impact in a setup like this. I'm not only using one of the triangle LFOs from the Caixa case, but I've also got the Oct module from DivKids, which has got 8 triangle waveform shaped LFOs. I'm sending all of these LFOs through the Noise Engineering Sync Deferro, which is basically just an attenuator, allowing me to send as much or as little of the LFO to these destinations as I want. So I can send just a small amount of modulation to things like the density of this reverb, or the tone of the reverb, or moving this index knob or the speed knob here. These things really add up to like a reverb and a texture that's ever shifting in the patch, and I really think this is where using, Eurorack effects in your sounds, really shines. In this setup, I've got 2 iPads out. We've got an iPad Pro on the left, and we've got an iPad Air 2 on the right. I think it's really important to note as well that each of these iPads is plugged into its own audio interface. I'm using 2 Novation Audio Hub 2x4 audio interfaces, but the brand of audio interface doesn't matter. I just think it's really important to use high quality audio when working with these iPads and not necessarily relying on the headphone jack if you have an older one with the headphone jack built in, because the headphone jacks are not really pro quality audio. So definitely when working with iPads, I recommend using audio interfaces for each iPad that you're working with. Now the setup here is actually a pretty simple one, and I'm only using one module in the case to process audio, and that's the Modbap Modular Performer, which allows me to kind of turn the 4 included effects on and off using these arcade buttons. It also allows me to latch those effects on or off, which is how I'm using it in this example here. I'm using the built-in delay and reverb of this module, and I'm also going to be turning the tape stop effect on and off. Now the iPad on the left is running my rack, and this is just giving us some drums and a bass line, and the iPad on the right is running AUM or AUM. I'm using the Riffer app from Audio Modern to generate some MIDI and send a melody over to the Synthmaster 1 synthesizer from KV331 Audio. Now the neat thing about this setup is that I can tell Riffer to generate a new random MIDI melodic part every 8 bars that matches the key that we're working in. So this is going to provide some gentle evolution and randomness inside of the melodic element that I'm actually sending through the performer's delay and reverb. Take a listen to what this sounds like. This was a really fun setup to put together. I've got a drum and bass beat going in the Polyend Play, and over here in the Polyend Medusa, I'm using a Reese bass preset from my Guardian sound bank. Now the Medusa pairs really well with this Caixa effects case because there's no built-in effects to the Medusa. So I'm running the Medusa directly out into the case, and of course the first thing I'm doing is making several copies of that signal so that I can run not only some clean copies, but also I'm using the Instro Ton again to get that sort of distorted sound on the top. I'm again running the Instro Ton through a high-pass filter to get rid of some of the low frequencies on that really distorted layer. I'm also running a layer through this moon phase filter in a low pass mode. This is getting a little bit more stereo separation in the sound because the moon phase from Patching Panda is a stereo filter. I went really over the top with this one, that I'm using all 6 inputs on the mixer. They're all just duplicates of that exact same mono signal. So 6 layers of sounds here that I'm processing through the case. It's pretty over the top. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like. If you were listening to that last example on monitors or a proper set of headphones, you might have noticed that it sounded a little bit muddy and strange actually in the stereo field. I'm not exactly happy with the way that this one turned out, and I think I just overdid it with, you know, the amount of actual layers that I've put together here in combination with using this stereo filter as well. I think this might have been a case where, you know, less would have been more, and that in the end I sort of muddied up the sound and confused it in the stereo field rather than made it, you know, amazing and awesome. I don't only want to share, you know, amazing and victorious sort of experiments and setups when it's not amazing. I sort of want to share that experience with you as well. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not exactly sure how this, you know, these results are going to go, and I definitely want to share the journey with you guys as well. Cool. All right, it's a new day, and I've tried again with the Polyend Play and the Polyend Medusa. I've changed the vibe up quite a bit this time, and we're down to a really chilled 85 BPM. This is kind of like a synthwave type of groove that I've created. I've swapped out a few of the modules in the Caixa case as well. I've removed the stereo Patching Panda filter and replaced that with a multi-mode filter from Erica Synths that I'm running in high pass mode. I've also added the local florist module from Pittsburgh Modular rather, and this is a chorus module. I'm getting some cool modulation in the patch again, using both of the LFOs in the Caixa case, and we're really utilizing that Desmodus Versio again. Take a listen to what this sounds like.